Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 223 for July 14th, 2021. Happy birthday to my mom. And this is the EdTech Situation Room. My name is Jason Neiffer. I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, Montana State Virtual School located on the absolutely stunning University of Montana campus, right here in smoky, hazy Missoula, Montana. And joining me tonight, as always, good evening, Dr. Wes Fryer. It is really excellent to see you tonight, sir.
It is excellent to see you as well. I have missed you, but actually have had some good weeks of travel close to your neck of the woods. I did a little calculation to say how could we swing, a trip up to Missoula. So, and I will say, I don't know, I predict next summer will be an exciting one for the Friars. I'll leave it mostly at that. But I did talk to my relatives about maybe doing a family oral history workshop up in Cody, maybe in June. So we'll have to chat and see if we couldn't maybe take a road show up to Missoula area and anyway, see. But it was great to be up there. And Deadwood, South Dakota, incidentally, really exceeded my expectations because that's where we had a family reunion. Now, Wild Bill Hickok was only there for a few days before he got killed. And you would think he had lived his life there the way the town claimed him. And it reminds of Catholic churches and Orthodox churches that had what did they call it? The remains of different, they were not called artifacts, but anyway, there's just the holy, remains. And so anyway, he's buried there and that's really famous, or exciting, but I won't go into excruciating detail because that is not the focus of this podcast, but Lead, South Dakota has the deepest mine that goes over 6,000 feet down, and it operated for over 100 years and pulled out tons of gold and just this quintessential, company town. But it is now the site of the dark matter detection effort of the United States. And so not at the bottom of 6,000, but, about halfway down is where they have this whole lab. It's called the Sanford Lab. We got to take a tour and see, where they send the cages up and down. They used to free fall, basically, these cages down. Anyway, it was just fascinating. So learning about, mining history and, old history such as we have here in the West, which is not as old as, many parts of the world. But yay to be back. And we have a new puppy in our family and there's lots of excitement around here. So I'm hopeful that fires are not burning and you're not smelling the burning national forest at this point. Are you guys doing okay for rain and that kind of thing?
No, it's very dry here, and the unfortunate situation is that I've never seen. I've only lived in Missoula this is my 6th, 7th summer in Missoula. I've never seen this many strung together 90 and 100 days here. So we have had a couple in the upper 80s, but this is very intense. Going back 3 or 4 weeks, we had a couple 100-degree days a few weeks back. But next week it's going to be, I was just going to check. I think Sunday it's going to be 106 and then Monday 100 and Tuesday 100. It's not necessarily the single days, at that temperature. It's all these days in a row and we've had relatively little moisture. So there are, dozens of smaller fires in Montana. And of course the large fires in northeastern California, are where we're getting most of our smoke and haze right now. And unfortunately, July 14th is a very early time for us to see smoke like this. So it's unfortunate. It is a product of, a changing climate because Western Montana used to have a bit more of a moderate climate. And Missoula in general would see rain in the summertime, and we really haven't seen all that much. A couple nights of rain, but that's all. So
yeah, well, when we were in Wyoming, that was similar to what we were hearing about the dryness and the probability of a difficult fire year. So yuck. Hey, it's a good time not to live in Seattle. And just about a week or so ago, they hit 108 or just crazy temperatures. So if folks are interested, Oklahoma's really not that bad right now. We're only hitting the low 90s, and we were at it was like 69 degrees this morning. So anyway. This isn't a weather show. What the heck are we going to talk about, Dr. Neifer? Do we even remember after 3 weeks of break?
I will say that there's no way we're going to cover all the news that's happened in the last 4 weeks. I did try to do a pretty decent job. I've been collecting some stories, but we look at technology headlines and try to kind of shoot them through the prism of education. And luckily, we know that schools across the United States are busy in the middle of their fall planning. I imagine have a couple comments about that tonight. So, we haven't missed too much in our brief hiatus in the last couple of weeks, but we have several categories to deal with tonight. So tonight, assuming we get to it all, and for those of you that have listened in the past know that we struggle sometimes to get through even parts of our list, we have security news, tech correction news, Google and Microsoft news, a couple really interesting things going on there, some COVID-related news, some social media information, the geeks of the week, and then if we get to it, I've actually read relatively little interesting Apple news in the last couple of weeks to share as well. So Wes, is there a place you'd like to start tonight?
You bet. Let's just jump into the tech correction. This is the New York Times from July 13th. France fines Google $593 million for not negotiating, quote, in good faith, end quote, with news publishers. As frequent listeners to the show will know, Jason's term for what we're continuing to see play out with probable regulation of technology companies is called the tech correction. And this, is an example. A month or so ago, we talked about Australia and how, for a while, Facebook just stopped putting news on. Well, did they shut down the platform entirely or just not have any news links? I think maybe they were not serving Australia. There was major issues with both Google and Facebook, and then there was a settlement, and part of that is just news companies wanting money for the use of their links. And since the beginning of the internet, being able to put a link to somebody's resource hasn't been something that's required an exchange of money. So anyway, this is a case that may be a harbinger. Is that the right word to say that? Of more fines to come, not only from Europe, but from other parts of the world as well. And then I'll throw one more in there and see what you think. Great, excellent, fantastic podcast by Sway. I know that Peggy George, one of our regulars here on the show, likes to listen to Kara Swisher Sway podcast, and this is an interview. It's called "Is This the Big Tech Breakup We've Been Waiting For?" And it's an interview with David Cicilline, who is one of the representatives in the U.S. Congress who has proposed legislation. I don't know what the current status of these bills are, but he explains the strategy of having 5 different pieces of legislation. And part of it was that there just wouldn't be this single big push and then, it's over, and then there's not any regulation. It was to kind of, spread things out a bit. But it really does seem like we're going to have some kind of tech regulation, even though, we have folks from the left and the right coming at this from very different perspectives. And as they say in the podcast, there isn't any evidence that conservative voices are generally being censored, like on Facebook. If you look, they talk in the podcast, if you look at, the top 10 most shared links, over half of those are consistently, conservative voices. But of course, the banning of President Trump from Twitter and a lot of the rhetoric that, surrounded the 2020 election and what's happened since has focused on that. But, we've talked about the social dilemma, the different impacts of, surveillance capitalism and the ways in which our data is monetized and weaponized. So, Dr. Neifer, do you think we're going to see more fines for the tech companies? And is the tech correction here?
Yeah, it clearly is probably the beginning of the broader action. And you mentioned the Trump lawsuit, which at least my reading of tech journalism's answer to that is that there may be something there from the standpoint of, I think, no matter what your political situation, we can all agree that there's something we need to be doing here in regards to big tech. But I'm not sure if Trump's thing is the suggestion, but the bottom line is that I don't think we come up with the right solution, but the only way we're going to do so is by throwing things, proposals up and then seeing we could do to modify and massage those to find the right middle ground there. And that's where I think a lot of this is going. The problem I keep running into, though, is that, Google is not the reason why news is in trouble right now, right? Like news made a massive mistake 25 years ago by throwing their wares online for free. They might have slowed down the vast adoption of internet as an information resource if they had thrown everything behind a paywall. But the bottom line is that news made that mistake themselves, right? And that was pre-Facebook. It was in fact, it was pre-Google that happened. It's something really interesting happened. I kind of run my own investment accounts, and I do some investment in stocks there as part of my process, and nothing fancy, but I do a lot of research. And the New York Times recently has ended up on a lot of kind of stock picker recommendation accounts, and I read a really interesting article the other day in the stock media talking about how the New York Times, in their process of putting a paywall up, and then starting to aggressively market and advertise all their amazing services that you get for $10 a month, have managed to get a huge subscriber base that increased dramatically during COVID. That's not going away after COVID is starting to evolve and dissipate from its pandemic high in 2020. And I'm not saying every news organization is going to be able to do that, because I think a lot of papers couldn't sustain their business behind a paywall. But I for journalism and broadly media to blame Facebook, Google now for that, I think is a bit disingenuous. I also think it's important to understand that Google is a discovery engine for news, right? Like, I can understand maybe not wanting to put the full article on Google's website, or on Facebook for that matter, but it is an important discovery engine. And to be honest, I would have no reason to go to the vast majority of news sources unless a search engine sent me there, right? I read only really 25 maybe total publications in any given month that I go to look at the publications. And I'm what I would say is probably a pretty advanced news consumer, right? The fact that I do all of those is that. Otherwise, I have to rely on discovery engines to do that. Google, services like Flipgrid or Flipboard, that's where I do that process. So again, I think we have to go through these proposals and go through regulatory regimes to be able to get to whatever the grand answer to all this mess is. But what I would say is I don't think we're quite there yet.
There definitely is a lot of whining going on by folks who are, quote, losing as a result of big tech, whether that's, and it's not just big tech, but, Walmart shutting down companies, and Amazon, and mom and pop stores and Main Street, there was some discussion about that in that Sway podcast. But there's also, the issue of liability and Section 230, and just whether or not regulation's not going to solve the disinformation challenges that we face on the platforms today. We just there's a lot of discussion and talk about antitrust, and about not allowing huge corporations to get even bigger. Maybe making Facebook step back their acquisition of Instagram, the ways in which Amazon is able to, put their product, both have a marketplace and products at the same time, and, do those kind of things. So it's going to be super interesting to see how that plays out. And you mentioned the Trump lawsuit. Here's a link to an MSNBC article that was actually from the 9th of July. And it's called "What Trump's Facebook, Google, and Twitter Lawsuits Really Mean for Its Campaign." And it's saying that there's a lot of lawsuits today, including these, that are not going to go anywhere in the courts in terms of being successful, because, hey, these companies, Twitter, Facebook, they are private companies under the law. They're allowed to have terms of service and community guidelines, and if you violate them, they can kick you out, even if you happen to be, the president of the most powerful nation in the world. But there's political gains that that he and the campaign and others are seeking to accrue as a result of this flapping around and complaining. But in your stock research, have you looked at some of the tech companies, and are they facing falling futures? I mean,
No.
Not okay.
Not the big ones. I mean, what I would say is that, and I guess, this is not really a journalism podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but I own a lot of stock in tech companies, right? And I guess maybe if you listen to me over time, I'm a crank about every company. So I wouldn't say that I'm a particular fan of one over the other, but I think I cover all the spectrum. I'm pretty sure I have Apple stock and Microsoft stock and Google stock and those particular pieces. But what I would say is that the big companies, I don't think are facing a lot of long-term threat, because I think even if there is regulation, it's not that Google, Apple, and Microsoft are too big to fail. It's just that who steps in their vacuum, right? Like, Google is much more than a search company; it's a cloud company, and that even if they break up the search from everything else, they may start charging more for Gmail and Google Drive, but I find enough value in that particular service, I personally would pay for it. But that's the problem with all these companies having so many fingers and things. It's also the Amazon problem too, right? Amazon started off as a book company, and they've made most of their money in the last 8 or 9 years in their cloud services, because they put together a truly outstanding model for rolling out websites and putting big infrastructure on the cloud. So much so that another article I see you threw in, Wes, talks about when Microsoft was offered a contract over Amazon, it created all sorts of red flags because of how well respected Amazon Web Services is in the industry. And there are a lot of smaller, stocks that I think are threatened by this. And of course, the stock market's a lousy barometer for a lot of things, right? Because oftentimes stocks will increase in value when there's disaster news and decrease in value when there's good news in regards to how the economy or the macro world impact individuals. I personally believe that we can't live in a world without all of these big companies because of how integrated they are in our lives. So the only option we really have, and I would maybe accept Facebook there, that's a whole different beast, but social media, I think you can divorce from that. But these big, hardware platform companies, I don't know where else I don't know who the alternative to those are. And it's not like you can go right now and get very great privacy-based email if you want to, and it costs you a little bit of money, but it's relatively inexpensive. People don't go there because they don't offer features, they're not easy to do, they're not prominent in the marketplace, they don't offer the ease of use on devices, and that has to matter at some point.
Yeah, well, and I don't hear, politicians or the ones writing these 5 pieces of legislation, calling for the shutdown and the end of any of these companies. But they certainly are talking about curtailing their ability to become gargantuan and to not have limits. What we were seeing, and I need to do a little more research on this in China, because, China is curtailing the power of, some of its companies and its entrepreneurs that have really, really grown. And I don't know if they're taking those over by the state or what they're doing. But to kind of bring this back to an educational focus, I mean, one thing, we've talked about this on the show, that we've seen Google specifically do is start charging for advanced features for its services. So in order to have, for instance, the ability to, I think it is even record your Google Meets, right? I think you have to be stepped up to an enterprise tier. That was a really important feature that we certainly utilized a lot during the pandemic, and other kinds of things. And it seems like Google Google has made a shift where everything was free for G Suite for education. Google Workspace now is differentiated with free tier, and some paid tiers. And, it very much remains to be seen how all this is going to play out. But if you happen to have the opportunity to talk about these issues with students, free speech, as we've talked about, and civics, and what the limits and boundaries of those are, what private companies are able to do, whether that's a private restaurant that wants to, kick somebody out who's being too loud or being, disruptive, or whether it's a company that wants to, enforce its terms of service or community standards. These are things that are important to talk about. And I think that as we see this play out in the political realm, competition, I actually had some bad experiences with T-Mobile, by the way, running out of data quickly when I was at Deadwood.
I saw that in Twitter.
Yeah. But, in general, and I've had really great experiences with T-Mobile overall. We've talked about this before. Competition is beneficial, and, it's good for there to be a marketplace and not just, a single player. So, we'll see. But there was just one more article under that category. Maybe you want to close that one out. That was the CNET July 7th article. I think you dropped in. YouTube recommendations serve up most videos viewers wish they'd never seen, study says. So
Mozilla released a study saying that 71% of measured attitudes about recommended videos on YouTube, the watcher said they regretted watching the recommended video. Now, I want to be very clear about this, and Wes and I, having some academic background in survey research, this thing has some problems. For example, you had to have had installed Mozilla's regret plugin to your browser, right? And if you are the person that's going to go install Mozilla's regret browser plugin, you're probably looking to regret some stuff, right? So to be clear, there's some issues there, but it doesn't mean that there isn't an issue there, especially a couple of things when you dig down into it. The bigger point here that I think Mozilla's trying to make and CNET's trying to make is that there are issues with, we've reported in the past about how YouTube is partially to blame for radicalization of folks in really anything, although obviously we're talking mostly about politics here in the bigger picture perspective. And as it turns out, one of the issues has been that, once you are down kind of a YouTube rabbit hole, it starts to deliver you increasingly intense views on things, which, if you think about it, it wouldn't be a surprise that you might perceive that someone can be radicalized by that notion. Now, that said, the complexity here is that it's hard to tell, right? And in fact, YouTube's response to this was that our own research says that people like what's delivered to them. And I've actually answered questions like that before. I've received recommendation questions from YouTube, and I answered honestly. And how good of a recommendation was this for you? And then you answer back. But it just does tell you that we've got a ways to go.
Yeah, we do. Well, I've done 3 workshops this summer for the Summer Institute on Digital Literacy. My first one was filtering the exaflood, which I think I'll probably call smart media dieting from now on. But I actually went through YouTube as well as Facebook and Twitter talking about the ways that our signals, train the algorithm and how we can try and use that. We don't have complete control and even visibility into these algorithms. But, for me, for YouTube, I have really, really good success with the recommendations, to the point where I can open up YouTube on my Apple TV or my phone or whatever, and just about always see something pretty quickly on my recommended videos. I'm like, okay, great. So I think a big feature of that, and if I was going to look at that research and how, in addition, it could be, besides widening the base beyond just those that had installed that plugin, I mean, how many of those folks are intentionally, not only liking and disliking videos, but, adding things to playlists, subscribing to channels, commenting, all of those things are signals which the algorithm takes into account. So it is interesting, by the way, to think educationally. This is an activity which can highlight the reality of the algorithm and how we have customized feeds, which could even be called algorithmic persuasion, that are, designed specifically for us, to just sit down next to somebody and say, hey, can you pull up the YouTube homepage? Okay, here, let me pull that up. And then open an incognito window and see what's presented there with nothing in terms of saved cookies and logins. And you're going to see different stuff. So those algorithms are alive and well. And part of the educational imperative from a media literacy standpoint is to help help everyone understand these algorithms can be beneficial, and targeted advertising in many cases can seem better than just, shot in the dark. I have no idea who you are. I'm going to show you, these Viagra ads or whatever it is. But there's a lot of other aspects to that whole equation. So we have succeeded in talking about half the show for the tech correction. And I didn't necessarily intend to do that by starting off with it, but I guess that sometimes happens when we pick a topic. So would you like to take us to some more tech geeky articles, perhaps, sir?
Yeah, let me say what I think is probably the biggest story that's happened the last 4 weeks in impact schools. So on June 24th, after a series of leaks, Microsoft held an event that announced Windows 11. And I guess Wes and I have been here long enough now, right, to where we were around when Windows 10 was released back in the day. And this is the last version of Windows ever, and that Windows will just be a service now that you buy once and you get all these updates and yada yada yada. Well, Microsoft is nothing if not unpredictable, and they have decided they will be releasing Windows 11. And I'm going to make some comments about this. I want to be also really clear that I have not been able to spend the time needed to make sure I have every new update about this, which seems to change about every 15 minutes. And even in the 10 days after this was announced, I felt like the story kept shifting over and over and over again. And even trusty journalists, and I'll call out Paul Thurrott from Thurrott.com, who's also the co-host of Windows Weekly on the Twit network, seems to be a bit of a twist as things evolve and change, as is Mary Jo Foley, the other co-host of that really great and informative show. So let me talk about very quickly for just a moment what Windows 11 is all about. It is obviously a different look, and to be honest, I don't really care about that. I do think it's kind of funny. It looks kind of like where Mac OS and Chrome OS have gone in the last a long time. So I guess that's it's funny, but doesn't really matter. There's also ways to tweak it to put the menu to the left again, so that stuff doesn't really matter. But new start menu that looks like maybe a slightly evolved start menu, so it doesn't really matter. It's not all that interesting. There are some things that are way deeper underneath that I think are probably worth your time, in that there's a new driver architecture. There's new very tight security features. And then the one that I think has caused the most interesting discussion, although I'm not sure if it really matters in the big picture, you can utilize Android apps. And their way to do that is to integrate the Amazon App Store, which I'll talk about separately in a moment. So I don't get this, in part because I feel like Windows 10's model has been really interesting, but I have heard a number of conversations on tech podcasts and read on tech news that some people theorize that one of the problems has been with Windows 10 is that there's just no need to upgrade once you have Windows 10, that it runs very well on older hardware. In fact, one of my go-to Windows laptops that I use to test things on for experimentation purposes is an 8-year-old ThinkPad, and it runs fast enough on a ThinkPad with a good SSD drive in there, and I think I have 8 or 16 gigs of RAM, that it would be just fine as my daily driver laptop. It's perfectly fast to do that. And I've heard some arguments made, including on the Windows Weekly podcast, that hardware manufacturers felt as if the new Windows strategy was diminishing sales, because if there's no new Windows, because everything is called Windows 10, a lot of people updated computers when there was a new version of Windows out, right? So there's lots of reasoning behind this, but that's not where the real controversy lies. What has come out is that you need to have a special security feature in your BIOS. I think it's called TP2 or something. It's a special security protocol that is only on basically computers that are 2017 and afterwards. And the reason why that is crazy to me is because I have a couple of years ago during a tech refresh, At work, I decided to go with a Windows laptop. It's the first time I've ever done that with work. I'd been a Mac guy before, and I bought a Microsoft Surface Book because that was something that was popular at the time, especially at the university I was at, because Microsoft was making big plays at universities. And it's still a very fast, and it's a pretty nice laptop. I prefer a Mac, as it turns out, and I've handed that on to someone else in our organization. But it's perfectly fast, right? It has a fast i7 chip in it. It's got a big old drive in it. It's got a lot of RAM in it. And that laptop can't run Windows 11, which means a 4-year-old laptop that was a premium Microsoft product will not be able to run the newest hardware. So I guess I'd start off with, and then I want to talk about maybe the schools discussion a little bit separately. Anything interesting to you here, Wes, from a new feature standpoint?
Thankfully, I am no longer in a role of even supporting folks that are using Windows. So no, I'm living in a Mac OS, iOS, Chrome OS world. And I'm super, super happy to live there. So I think that I was trying to find an article and see if I had linked to it, because I don't know if it was in the Twit or another podcast that I was listening to was talking about Microsoft's strategy for doing this. And they evidently did have one, but it's not feature laden, and it doesn't seem to be extremely well, thought out. So the interesting thing with this kind of deal is what impact for schools. I mean, we just tend to hang on to our machines usually for as long as we can, and they can still function, and so it sounds like they're putting in some programmed obsolescence with that chip requirement and things like that. And, on the one hand, we need security updates, and we don't need people running. We shouldn't have people. The more folks that run unpatched, insecure systems, the more insecure our entire ecosystem is. So we do need to have folks move forward with patches and updates and things like that. But the little bit that I've read about it sounded just like you're representing here to be pretty slipshod, not really impressive in terms of a feature set that's going to impact people, and maybe still a little bit murky in terms of exactly the why they were framing this as a Windows 11 update and even doing this whole push.
Now, that said, one thing I would say is that Microsoft has made interesting arguments, and a lot of this has been through friendly media outlets, but there may be very good reasons to limit an operating system to this new security protocol. But the problem is, and the article I'll refer to here is a gentleman by the name of Noah Bailey put a blog post on June 27th, is that the bottom line is that if you're going to make this a minimum requirement, whereas it appears that much older machines will be able to very effectively and efficiently run Windows 11, one of the claims of Windows 11 is that it works much better on lower end hardware, which, by the way, was one of the great claims of Windows 10, and they were right. A lot of low end Windows hardware that struggled on Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1 actually worked pretty well, at least good enough to be a basic surfing machine on Windows 10. But when we're saying that we're going to force this 4-year-old or less CPUs, and then to have this chipset available as part of your BIOS, it's going to create massive amounts of e-waste, especially if Microsoft decides, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to have two parallel systems, right? Windows 10 and Windows 11. I assume at some point that they start to, stop supporting Windows 10. And right now I think it's been like 2 years that the half-year updates stop getting supported or stop getting updates. It's something along those lines. But I know they're not supporting the 2015, 16, 17 versions of Windows 10 at this point. But at some point, they'll stop supporting that, at which point then, schools have a terrible choice. Do we get rid of all of our hardware that's working just fine and would work just fine on Windows 11 minus that security feature, or do we run insecure machines? And I guess if anything, what we've been proven over and over again in the last little bit is that security matters and up-to-date machines matter and installing patches matter. So I don't know. I feel like this is just so short-sighted. even though I do buy that, that apparently the security chip allows for a better, more secure driver set. It allows for tighter integration between hardware and operating system software. But remember, that's what Mac does. But the way they pull that off is by having their own hardware. They don't sell their operating system to install on other kinds of machines. You can only do on Apple. And the way Microsoft has grown so much in the last, really 30 years, going back to DOS, 40 years if you include DOS, is that, it installs on everything, right? It works on everything. And that's the power of it. So I was pretty disappointed in this. If things keep shifting, right? Like, they had a tool where you could test your machine, then they took it down, then they put it back up, and now it's down again. You can install Windows 11 technical preview on any kind of computer. You don't have to have the chip. It seems like a messaging mess from our friends at Microsoft.
The big question for Microsoft, in my view, is going to be, are you going to reinvent your operating system? Right. And we're seeing Google, what is it called? Azure, maybe one of the ones that Google is working on. There's another program that Google's is doing, but even with Chrome, right, with Chrome OS, that's a new OS.
Yeah, the Fuchsia OS is what's right. Yeah.
Fuchsia, thank you. Yeah, Azure is a Microsoft, data in the cloud. Sorry, too many acronyms, and I'm not having to talk that lingo as much now as not being a tech director. Here's a very important thing that I would kind of just say overall. We need to keep our minds open, and this is hard because of baby duck syndrome, and we invest in certain technologies, but we need to I remember how long, and I'll call them out, Lubbock Independent School District ran the freaking Novell client on all of the systems in school, and we had to run that on Mac as well as Windows, and it was way beyond the time when Novell should have been sunsetted. We need to have our minds open to how the landscape's changed, especially security, and Chrome OS is just an absolutely fantastic platform for school computing. I'm really looking forward to all of our middle schoolers, having brand new Chromebooks next year with styluses. It'll be a Dell variant, but anyway, Microsoft's continuing to hobble along with what they've had, as you said, since 40 years, and they've been putting code upon code and continuing to try to keep it relevant. So hopefully, because I do believe that we benefit from competition and innovation, we will see some excellent innovation and foresight coming from Microsoft, but I don't think we're seeing it with Windows 11. And, how many people, because of the power of the internet and the ability to run apps in a variety of different ways and not have to just run them on Windows, are able to use a variety of different computing systems. And what is that going to mean for business and enterprise? I don't know that we've reached a tipping point where we're seeing all kinds of businesses turning their back on Microsoft, but I would love to see, and maybe we could do a little research on this for upcoming shows. What do schools look like, in terms of how many folks are running Windows laptops today in one-to-one, programs? I think there's a heck of a lot that are running, Chrome OS and Chromebooks, and there's iPads and there's Mac laptops. There's other things too, but Microsoft is certainly, from an educational instructional technology standpoint, they do not seem to me to be on the edge of innovation. Now, Miguel Gulen, who's got his Microsoft certifications and is really, drunk deeply from that well, maybe I'll reach out to him and see what he has to say about that.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think we need all the Microsoft folks as part of this discussion, right? Because I would imagine it's a little disappointing if you went all in on Surfaces, for example, and I have not seen any definitive information about, like, if 3 or 4 year old Surfaces would be eliminated from Windows 11 as well. But that's a real bummer for a district, that if you bought into the Surface, and I know a lot of districts that, and to be clear, that was a wonderful innovative form factor, and And the Surface book that I have was a wonderful, innovative form factor, and I love Windows 10. Windows 10 is a great operating system. It is infinitely better, in my humble opinion, than the OS it replaced, which for me was Windows 7. Windows 8 was but Windows 10 was really great. In fact, I've been a primary Windows 10 user for most of the last 5 years, but on Windows machines. But the bottom line is that it felt more like 20-year-old Microsoft than it did recent Microsoft, because I feel like they've been heading generally in the right direction. So
there has been a lot of innovation. I just noticed you do not have a Geek of the Week, sir. So if you haven't, you have 20 minutes. So
thank you.
You've got some time. Why don't we pick up a couple social media and COVID related articles, and then maybe we can get some Google stuff. And I'd really love to hear you do that Audacity spyware. I'd seen that article, and the one that you put in there looks good. But let me pick this one up on social media. This is Engadget from July 9th. TikTok will automate video removals for nudity and violence. I think this is a good thing. We have heard, Facebook and other social media folks and pundits, tell us how artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to be the salvation for, offensive content online and disinformation. But there are real limits to those algorithms and how well they can do that. But the fact that TikTok is employing these algorithms is good. And also interesting in the article is that they're making their actual software available. I'm pretty sure I read that in this article. Maybe it's not in there. I'm pretty sure I read that they were also offering up some of their algorithms and their AI technology. So that sounds like a positive. And on the educational lens, hey, when school starts in August or September maybe for you or whenever, hey, how many of your kids are on TikTok? I'm going to definitely I'm going to get to be a 6th grade advisor this year in addition to teaching my media literacy classes. And we've done some different surveys and polls and things like that. But at least of the kids that I'm teaching, I'm really interested in some of those metrics, because it was kind of shocking, even under 13, just a ton of kids using TikTok. It's a hugely popular platform. And then I put 2 under the COVID heading. These actually shout out to Kristen Zemke, who's an amazing educator and literacy consultant and just wonderful person in the Chicago area. She's one of our faculty for the Summer Institute on Digital Literacy. These are, one of them's not too old. This was a July 8th article from Parents Magazine. And the title is 6 Things About Remote Learning Teens Actually Loved. And this is an article by a teen. And there was another article I didn't drop in, but it was like, this was a year old. Can we stop telling the COVID generation kids how little they've learned? But like there were some really, really positive things that did come out of remote learning. And there's things that we need to keep in mind and take forward as we, enter this next school year, which will hopefully be more of a return to normal. But that was an excellent article, and might be the first article from Parents Magazine we've ever had in the show. And then the next one was a July 9th article, and this is from Axios. And the headline here is the post-COVID stickiness of hybrid school. And it's citing some statistics where parents as well as students in some cases really liked the option of online remote school, hybrid school. And so there's a marketplace demand. It says a sizable chunk, 28% of students at the end of this year were still in a hybrid school, which meant breaking up days in the classroom and days at home. And so it's suggesting that parents and students are going to push schools to try and include some of those pedagogies and not simply throw everything from the last 18 months or whatever away, going back to quote unquote the way it was, but maybe some of those things are going to move forward. So Jason, do you see increased enrollments in your future for the Montana Digital Academy? And do you think where you sit in Montana, there are going to be some of these residual impacts from COVID and remote learning that are going to impact how students want to learn and how parents want to choose to send their kids to school?
Yeah, I'd say that I'm a little less optimistic than I was 6 months ago that that districts will use this as a real opportunity to adopt some new ways of looking at things. It's been surprising to me in some cases watching these discussions go on, how quickly we're just shutting down what had been developed in the last 18 months instead of thinking of ways of keeping it going or taking the best of it and evolving. So I will say that as a caveat. But yeah, I've seen a lot of these interesting discussions going on. And I'll go back to, I think it was a Pew Internet Life that did started some of this surveying in the late spring, that parents and students aren't all abandoning online options. Many of them want to keep them around, and for some of the reasons that the primarily face-to-face environment wasn't working for their kids before. And I'm happy to have the discussion about what works and what doesn't inside of these environments. I think that discussion oftentimes, especially pre-pandemic, was more about hysterics as opposed to real research. The gold standard research stuff that is double blind. Well, you can't really do a double blind study in this, but randomized studies. Unfortunately, very few of those have been done. In part because it'd be difficult to do that, right? In regards to that, but there's been very little super high quality research in the efficacy of distance learning environments, and the stuff that exists say that in general, face to face is more effective than online environments, but that doesn't really mean anything when you start to put it through the spectrum of individual student needs. There's a lot of kids that are not best served by sitting through even a progressively scheduled K-12 school in the face-to-face environment. There's a lot of health reasons, both physical and mental health. There's a lot of social reasons. There's a lot of family reasons why some kids are better served by being outside that more traditional environment. I'm not saying that it's easy to do that, or it's financially realistic to do that, or those sorts of things, but I think we have to be extra realistic that many kids need some additional options that we've really funded for K-12 schools. That all said, my program has some natural limitations built into it because we're not built to be a full-time environment. But yeah, we get a lot of calls from parents that want to take advantage of this environment. I would argue that asynchronous learning environments are generally more flexible and generally meet student needs better than kind of the hybrid teaching model where there is a notion of trying to keep face-to-face via Zoom meetings. I thought it was interesting. I'll need to find this study because maybe I'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. Microsoft had released a study that says that it's just not good for us to be on video conferencing calls for 8 hours a day. I agree, right? In fact, Tuesday is my day where I have a lot of regularly scheduled meetings, and sometimes that means sitting on Zoom teams meet for 6-7 hours, and it is incredibly draining, and I'm in this industry, right? Like I sit in front of a computer all the time anyways, and that to me, I agree with that, right? Like I think trying to recreate the face-to-face environment utilizing video conferencing is an easy thing to set up, but isn't always doing students and teachers a lot of favors. But yeah, I hope we can take some things from this.
All right. Well, we've got about 11 minutes. We've got some articles under Apple, security, and Google. What would you like to do next?
Let's see here. Maybe... Yeah, let's talk about these Google articles quick. Just a couple of quick ones here. First, something's happening on Chrome OS that I'm not entirely putting my finger on yet because it's still pretty hit or miss. But ZDNet reported on July 4th something very interesting. Opera, which has been an alternative web browser available for 22, 23 years, has been around a long time. But Opera, which still exists, it's got a Chromium base to it, which means it's based on the open source project that also backs Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge for that matter. Opera has released an alternative browser on the Android store for Chromebooks that's basically a desktop browser, but in an Android app. And what I mean by that is that if you have a Chromebook that can install Android apps, which is every modern Chromebook, you've probably noticed that if you go install Firefox, for example, it's not Firefox. It is the mobile version of that browser. And Opera has been the first to take advantage of the fact that you can install something on a Chromebook that feels and looks closer to the desktop version of the browser. And I didn't really believe that. And then I went and downloaded, and sure enough, it feels very nice and very desktop-like in its experience. And the only thing I want to juxtaposition to that with is that I also, on a lark, about a week ago, downloaded, hands down, my favorite graphics program is Canva. Canva is an important part of my daily experience in all of my day job, my side projects. It's replaced everything that has to do with graphics. Canva is amazing. By the way, free pro version for teachers. It doesn't take that much to get it either, and it has 60 million pieces of clip art and photos in its library. It's unreal how great Canva is. But I prefer the desktop version. I prefer the web version of it to the apps because the web version is just more stable and it feels easier. And I downloaded the Android app the other day on a lark, and it is light years ahead of where it was a couple of years back. And Android apps to me have always been kind of a joke. I love Chrome OS. I think it's a wonderful operating system, but the Android apps always seem pretty hit or miss. It seems like quietly some app developers are starting to create apps that feel like desktop apps as opposed to mobile apps that just are bigger on the screen. So I don't know if that's a bigger thing that's going to go on, or maybe Chrome OS will continue to quietly reinvent itself. But I thought that was super interesting.
Sounds good. Hey, how about that Audacity article under security?
Yeah, let's do that one. So something happened earlier this year. Audacity, which is an open source project that was run by a for-profit company, was purchased by something called the Muse Group. And the Muse Group is they make a software for musicians and audio post-production and that sort of thing. And it's an open source editor, right? Earlier this year, it was acquired by the Muse Group. And on July 2nd, Muse Group updated the privacy policy. And this is from Lifehacker on July 6th, to say that there would be some limited personal information sent back to improve the application. And it also noted that the company may share your personal data with law enforcement and sell it to potential buyers, right? This is an open source piece of software. So a lot of people freaked out almost immediatfor there was some discussion that, it's pretty typical for commercial software to do this. But the fact this is happening in an open source piece of software is very troubling to the community. And to be honest, I don't know anyone that uses the commercial alternatives to Audacity. Everyone I know that's editing audio uses Audacity. It's installed on every computer I own right now.
Absolutely. I love Audacity. I edit, almost all my podcasts on it. And I actually was on a slower internet connection when I was in Deadwood. And so I did edit a podcast in GarageBand. I hadn't done that in years. But that article that you put in has a link to a couple alternatives, including Dark Audacity, which I'd never heard of before. And it is an open source project built on the open source Audacity, but not including those kinds of features. So if you're in a camp concerned about your, it is IP address, and probably they can connect that in the cloud to all kinds of things. But anyway, if you're concerned about the data being collected, there is Dark Audacity. There are some other options. It's another sign of the times of surveillance capitalism, I guess, right? People see opportunities to monetize by sharing data. So I think that's probably what the Muse Group is seeing here.
Awesome.
All right. Anything else that you'd like to pick up?
Let's see here. I think probably almost everything here we can push to next week. I mean, I will make one other reminder, just because I've been dealing with this a little bit personally in my professional life. We've said this before, and chances are, if you are listening now, you've probably heard us say this in the past. If you have not ordered your tech for fall 2021, that's got to be mission number one.
Well, and you're probably too late. It really depends on what you need to order and how much.
Yeah, I worked with someone a couple of days ago that was working on a small project, and they needed custom amounts of RAM. They needed high RAM machines for what they were doing, and the delivery date was February 2022. So it's getting better, but ugh.
Our teachers have upgraded to the new M-processor MacBook Airs this summer, and I have been using. I had tested one earlier in the spring, but wow, what a fast machine, and what a delight it is to just have everything happen faster. So how fast do we need it to be? I don't know. It seems like we're doing pretty good there. So sometimes the internet connection is the slower part now, rather than the computer itself.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, shall we geek of the week it?
Yeah, I want to share a tool that is one of my first installs on almost every computer I use, and its simplicity is the reason why I like it. It's called Simple Note, and Simple Note is like Evernote. It's like Microsoft OneNote. It's like any of these like syncing note products, but it is text only, right? It's got apps on literally everything. There is a Chrome OS web app. There is a Microsoft a Windows app. There is a Mac OS app. There is an Android app. There is an iOS app. But it's just simple. It's made by the people that make WordPress. Automatic is the company that makes WordPress, and Simple Note is owned by Automatic. And I absolutely love it because I don't put anything, like I don't put student data in there. I don't put private data in there. I don't put credit card numbers in there or any of my passwords in there. But it is a very simple way to take text and text notes and move them across all my different devices. And it's one of the first things I install. And I looked the other day, I have like 450 notes on here. It's just random text that I dump into there, and I love it. It's really great. Simple Note.
Wow.
Is the name of that tool.
Okay, fantastic. I have been increasingly putting my notes into the Notes app of iOS, and it's nice to have that synchronized across my phone. Sometimes my iPad, but usually my laptop. I've even used it in the conference this time. Anyway, you can AirDrop things and whatever, but I'm doing that. And then mine is BB Edit. Have you used that as a Mac app?
Have.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it used to be Text Wrangler, which was free, and then they discontinued it. But it's Bare Bones, I think, creates it. But I have actually never heard of Simple Note. So yay, great to hear something about a new tool. My geek of the week is a video, and it comes from Verodiseum, which is an outstanding YouTube channel. If you don't follow him, one of those channels that regularly gets, millions of views on those videos. And he just posted this on July 9th. It's called The Biggest Myth in Education. Have you heard of this before, Jason?
No.
Okay, so let me just ask you, before telling what it is, what do you think the biggest myth in education is? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with educational research and something that a lot of teachers believe in, and even professional development folks will pass along and talk about, but the research doesn't sustain it.
Is it learning styles?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. $500 to Dr. Knifer in Missoula, Montana. So yes, learning styles. It's one of those things that, you hear about and people will talk about, and it just kind of makes sense, right? Yeah, there's kids that just want to move, and there's kids that are more visual, and there's kids that are more auditory. But honestly, the educational research is absolutely conclusive. It's not supported by research. And so we have a lot of different modalities. And yes, it is wonderful to include different mediums and medias and to get your students active and involved in different ways. But do learning styles exist? No, they don't. And so I think it's awesome to see a very prominent YouTuber taking on an educational myth. So check out Verodiseum. And if you don't subscribe to him, check it out, because he's got amazing stuff. And a lot of his things are science and STEM related, but not all.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I think we've done it. We've talked again for an hour. It's just amazing that we can do this every
right. And it went so quickly too. So Wes, hey, where can people find you on the internet?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and I've collected all of my various channels that you can subscribe to if you want to learn about backyard barbecue or media literacy at wesfryer.com/after. How about you, Dr. Knifer?
I am on the Twitter is a Tech Savvy Teach. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, ncce.org. By the way, the 2022 conference, which is face-to-face in Seattle. Dates are still being finalized, but there will be a request for proposal up soon if you want to come hang out with people in Seattle. But this here is an NCCE or even Twitter. It is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a once-a-week podcast where Wes and I get together via StreamYard and broadcast out to YouTube and Facebook and talk about the tech news and through an educational prism. If you'd like to download the podcast, feel free to do so anywhere finer podcasts are aggregated. In fact, I have yet to see a new podcasting app or directly that doesn't feature the EdTech Situation Room. If you want to watch us live, again, Facebook and YouTube are your locations. You can also find us on Twitter at EdTechSR. You can go to our website, edtechsr.com, and not only download show notes, tiny MP3 versions, but you can also get a link to our links. And every week we put together a number of links, many of which we don't get to because our hour runs out. We'd love to see you live, but if you can't see us live, feel free to download us after the fact. We wish you a great week. Stay safe, stay savvy, and we hope to see you here next time on the EdTech Situation Room.
Good night, everybody.